skeptic and comedian Ian Harris. Ian, welcome to Truth Wanted.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Appreciate being here.
Yes, absolutely. So in case you are watching this for the first time, Truth Wanted is a live call-in show that happens every week on Fridays at 7 p.m. So if you're watching this on YouTube live, you already know, folks, call that number at the bottom of the screen and you get to talk to me and my awesome guest, Ian Harris. Ian has been doing comedy for quite a while now. He's has a special that's out that you can get on YouTube. And he also has been giving talks at some atheist conferences and stuff. He's also really into MMA, and we had some interesting conversations about that before the show that I want to get into. But first, Ian, I want to talk about some of the stuff you've done in comedy, because one thing that makes you different from a lot of comics is you talk a lot about skepticism. And, you know, that's not to say that a lot of comics aren't skeptics. I think that's, you know, true to some extent, but it's a topic that you've kind of really expanded on a lot in your comedy. What do you think kind of inspired you to do that? And why do you think it's important to talk about that in your comedy?
You know, I mean, so as we talked about before, I mean, I've always been kind of a skeptic my whole life. Like I grew up as I was an atheist. I was never indoctrinated with anything. And I've always just kind of been a skeptic. And I did comedy for almost going on 30 years now, 28 years. But for the longest time, I just did regular comedy. And yeah, sometimes it would infuse, like sometimes I would do bits, ghost bits, or I'd do a joke about religion or whatever, but I just did regular comedy. And then when I had my kid, I had a daughter in 2005, and I decided I just didn't want to be on the road full time, and I stopped doing comedy. I stopped touring. I stopped doing it for like 5-6 years. And then I decided in 2011 that I really missed it and that I wanted to do it, and that I wanted my daughter to see me, because she never knew me as a comedian. Like it wasn't even in her understanding of who I was as a human. So I said, I'm going to get back into comedy. I want to work and do something that I can show my daughter when she gets older. So I started doing comedy again. And since I didn't need to do it for a living, and since I didn't care about what would happen if I didn't get into a comedy club, I just started talking about what I enjoyed talking about, which happened to be skepticism and atheism and these sort of things. Because I figured, well, what's going to happen if no one wants to hear it? Who cares? I'm doing it for myself. If the clubs go, ooh, that's too edgy, you can't do that here. Who cares? I'm doing it for myself. And it ended up being like the most prolific time in my life. And it actually ended up being where people started getting on board with what I do. It was pretty interesting, because it's just out of nowhere. It was like I kind of wish I would have started this back when I started doing comedy.
Yeah. And, you know, like you were kind of talking about this a bit before the show, the idea of kind of, I don't want to say exploiting, but kind of expanding on that niche of skeptics and comedy. You know, like we were talking about some Christian comics in the past that have made a splash, because I mean, the majority of comics are probably pretty secular, but they may not necessarily be atheists. And so you've kind of found an audience with that. You've you know, booked a couple of venues at some atheist events and stuff like that. And so like when you're doing that, what is that like compared to doing that with an audience that's not as skeptic? Because I imagine you've had some pretty mixed reactions from people with some of your comedy, right? Like it doesn't always rub people the right way.
No. I mean, well, the good thing is it all depends, I think, on where I'm performing it. The good thing is that nowadays, especially, people come to see me. They know what they're coming to see. You know what I mean? If you're a fan of Dave Chappelle's and you go to see Dave Chappelle and you're offended by Dave Chappelle, well, maybe you're at the wrong spot. I mean, no one's going to pay that kind of money to go see somebody that they've never seen before.
That's
so I
true.
think the good news is that people come and see me, and they usually know what's going on. But I still do regular shows, and I still do some shows with my podcast partner Ty. And when we do those shows, we're open to a lot of different topics. It's not just, we do race, religion, politics, all sorts of stuff. And even advertising it that way, we still get people come up or who are upset. And we're doing it in a theater or something. So you had to seek us out, see it.
You had to go. You had to pay money to get upset, right? Yeah.
It wasn't like you just showed up at the comedy club and who's this guy on stage? It was like you had to go to the newspaper or the radio and find this.
You're not the opener. You're the main show. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But it is still amazing where I think people don't expect necessarily. For me, I'm pretty critical of all types of beliefs because I find them funny. So I laugh at them. And I think the other thing is that we kind of talked about this a little bit too on a separate issue, is that sometimes people have one set of beliefs that they don't think are ridiculous. So if I come in and I've got an hour show and I talk about Bigfoot and I talk about aliens and I talk about chemtrails and I talk about whatever, a gluten allergy or whatever it is I'm talking about, GMOs or whatever the thing that I'm talking about, and you're on board with all those, and then all of a sudden I get to Jesus and everyone else is still laughing, but you're not, all of a sudden I think it kind of goes, wait a second, why is everyone else laughing at the same stuff? I was laughing with them, same formula. I'm talking about the same sort of stuff. This isn't supported by evidence. It's not supported by science. So why do you believe it? Haha, it's hilarious. Here's an analogy that doesn't make any sense. And I do that over and over, and all of a sudden it gets to the one thing you are and you believe in. And you could be an atheist, but maybe you are, maybe you still believe in ghosts, or maybe you believe in something else. And I do that, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, wait a second. That's not right. I believe in that too. And yeah. And then you get those people coming up to you after the show going, everything was good, but hey man, Bigfoot's real. It's like,
right. Cause like being an atheist just means you lack that God belief. That doesn't mean you can't believe in other crazy BS. I mean, there's like, just because you're a secular person doesn't mean that you are instantly rational and that everything you encounter, you're going to see through a skeptical lens. I mean, right. I live in Austin, and I joke about Austin all the time because it's full of liberal people who are really open-minded, but like that, as the phrase goes, your mind's so open that your brain falls out. I think that's kind of true to some extent, right? Because I see people talking about Reiki and people talking about like weird therapies for their pets and stuff like that. That's just not based on anything real. It's just based on people feeling good about something. And that can be, good to some extent, but right. When you're talking about huge claims like healing cancer or stuff like that, that's when it really harms people. So, obviously I'm an advocate for talking about this kind of stuff, but yeah, I imagine talking about it on stage, you're probably going to hit a few people's nerves. So it's probably interesting to see those reactions, right?
Yeah. And I think, not only does not everyone come to atheism through skepticism. Some people just, all of a sudden they don't like God or whatever, or they have somebody dies in their family. And so a lot of times people, they come to atheism or irreligiosity, whatever the word is, through another means. So they haven't learned to deal with these other things through a skeptical lens. And also sometimes people have this weird, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. They move their religion to another thing. So like I'm religious. I don't, I realize that my pastor did something and now I'm mad. And now I look into it and all of a sudden I realize I'm not religious, but they haven't learned to evaluate evidence. So what happens is all of a sudden the next thing is their religion becomes their gluten allergy, or their religion becomes the pyramids and the aliens, or the religion becomes chemtrails. They're still religious, just about not religion,
Yeah, it's like when you're talking about religious, my understanding of that is they put this certain belief in a box that can't be looked at or can't be examined, as far as, everything else. Because, yeah, I agree. Like growing up irreligious doesn't give you the skills you need to necessarily be critical in what you need in a daily life, especially now when in the information age, when disinformation is so prevalent. We kind of need those skills now more than ever. I don't care if you're an atheist or not, like you should be able to look at some of the stuff and at least try to start the skeptic process, I guess. And that's really what it is. It's more of a methodology than any particular beliefs, at least as far as being a skeptic is concerned, for myself. But you do have a podcast that you mentioned as well, and I want to talk about that. What is this podcast that you do right now?
Well, it's called Critical End Thinking, which is, it's funny because it's actually named after my first comedy special. But it really is, we decided to call it that. So it's myself and Ty Barnett, who's another comedian. And Ty and I used to do a tour together called Divided Comedy Tour. And that was where we talked about race, religion, politics from my perspective being a white guy from Santa Cruz and his perspective being a black guy from Chicago. Both comedians, same age, both have kids, all that sort of stuff. How do we talk about these things from our own perspective. So we used to do comedy about that. And then we decided to do a podcast, and we just like the name Critical and Thinking because it's kind of also describes us, like, you know, of how we approach things. Like he's always hypercritical and I'm always like, well, let's think about this. Right. So we thought, but it's mostly, it's not really a comedy. We try to be funny, but it's more of a political podcast. Like we've tried to not be political, and we always end up going down the political route. So we talk a lot about politics. Sometimes we have guests. We've had some really great guests. We've had some, great guests from the atheist community, and Cara Santa Maria and Seth Andrews, and like tons of great guests. And sometimes we just get on and we wing it ourselves. It's fun. So yeah, Critical and Thinking, if anybody wants to check it out, it's politics.
Definitely check that out. We'll probably have links to it somewhere in the description that you can find as well. And skepticcomedian.com that we got there at the lower third is Ian's website, where you can check out some of his other stuff there as well. Just to remind you guys, this is a call-in show, so we still got some open lines here. So if you want to come talk to us, we'll be taking calls here in about 10 minutes. We'd love to talk to you about what you believe and why. That's kind of the tagline, but honestly, we talk about so much more than that sometimes. One thing I also wanted to talk to you about was you're involved with the MMA, or at least in mixed martial arts. And there's a video I saw recently about kind of the bizarre fake world of like fake martial arts. And I didn't realize this, but you've actually done some talks about some of the fake stuff that goes on in the martial arts world. And I was wondering if you could just kind of expand on that a little bit, because like there's like bubbles of bullshit out there. I think I've seen it all. And then I find some entirely new ecosystem of con artists and just crazy systems of belief. So like, what are some of the fake stuff that goes on in like the MMA world?
Well, I think, arts in general, you have a lot of things. I mean, you have first off, you still have people that believe in the chi power, and that they can muster up, energy balls and throw you across the room, or they can create. What's that?
Yeah, like a Kamehameha, like Dragon Ball Z. Just me.
Exactly.
Okay,
fine. Or they can create a shield that stops them, that makes them impenetrable. There's that kind of craziness. But then there's also just regular martial arts where you have, the stuff we've been doing for hundreds of years or whatever, where there's kung fu and karate and all the various versions of kung fu and karate and taekwondo and all these different things. And they have their own level of bullshit, and it's going to piss a lot of people off. It's not to say that they don't have their use, but if you are looking for self-defense and you really want to learn how to fight or defend yourself, it gives people a major false sense of security, because you're learning, if you're a 102-pound person and you're learning to do jump spin kicks in your Taekwondo class, and you've never actually had somebody coming at you and try to throw you on the ground and try to assault you or whatever, and all you're doing is sparring with all this stuff, and you're touching each other and you're doing hi-ya, and some 250-pound drunk dude just storms you at a bar and you throw a spin kick, it's not going to work. You're going to be on the ground getting punched in the face or whatever it is. And it's like, so a lot of people, I think, have this idea still, even some in the skeptic community, where martial arts, even if they don't believe the goofy magical stuff, that they are still effective. And they're not. I mean, they can be, and there's parts of them that are, but you have to know. That's why MMA is what MMA is. MMA didn't start out as mixed martial arts. MMA started out as jiu-jitsu versus wrestling versus karate versus boxing. Who was the best style? And then eventually people started going, ooh, I need to know a little bit of this and a little bit of that so I can fight this guy and also fight this guy. And then eventually it was like everyone learned how to wrestle and learn how to do jiu-jitsu and learn how to kickbox and learn how to do karate. And they put it all together to create a system of knowing as much as they can. And that's realistic self-defense.
Yeah, it's almost like a scientific way of figuring out the best way of fighting somebody. It's like, here's all the styles and here's like the best moves out of those styles, and you just kind of pick and choose which ones you like, right? Is that a correct assessment? I have no idea.
Absolutely. It's funny that you say that, because back when I started teaching, so I've done boxing, kickboxing, I wrestled, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for a long time, I've done traditional martial arts. And when I started training fighters, there was no such thing as mixed martial arts. MMA wasn't even a word yet. So I was trying to see what do I call my style? Do I call it, hybrid martial arts? What do I call it? So I decided to call it fight science.
Fight science.
So, which a lot of people think is a fundamentalist Christian group. But it's
yeah, it does. It's yeah, that can be interpreted in different ways. Maybe science fight or fighting. I don't know. I don't know what you do.
So I eventually added the MMA at the end of it when mixed martial arts became a term. But yeah, so I thought instead of martial art, how about it's the science of fighting? So that's what I started calling it, fight science, and then eventually became Fight Science MMA. And now Fight Science is the name of my gym, not my style. But originally that was the style until it got a real name. That now everyone does mixed martial arts, and all their mixed martial arts are a little different. One gym might have a more kickboxing background, and one might have a wrestling background. One might be more of a jiu-jitsu background. But for the most part, most MMA gyms do the same types of stuff. You learn how to fight on the ground. You learn how to submit. You learn how to wrestle. You learn how to box, punch, kick, knee, elbow, all that sort of stuff. And then you learn how to put it together. And then you learn, if you want to do the sport of it, you learn how to do it in a cage with the rules. But yeah, so for me, it's like, that's realistic. That's realistic martial arts is really realistic self-defense. Although then you're going to get people go, oh, but it's a sport and you have gloves on and there's rules. Sure. For the sport, for the
sport, but you can take those techniques in general and apply it to different stuff. Like I think even Bruce Lee talked about, some of the moves he does are flashier and not as practical for the movies, but there's also the more practical stuff isn't as great for the movies, right? So they don't, always show that kind of stuff. So there's definitely like this kind of pop culture idea of what martial arts is and how to be, the best at it, I guess. And some people think it's some sort of spiritual enlightenment. You'll just gain these super powers and stuff. Like if you look at some of the videos of some of these guys that are teaching these ridiculous methods, it's literally the exact same thing as like the Pentecostal churches, where like some guys at the front and they're, maybe they're whipping a cloth or they're putting their hand on somebody and the person falls back and, to them, they're saying, oh, it's the Holy Spirit taking over. And for the martial arts guy, it's my Tai Chi power level. I don't know. That's doing something to them. So it's the exact same thing. And they're using the exact same kind of psychological tricks to do this. And sometimes it's just actors. So yeah, really.
Yeah. And it's bizarre because people buy into it. And once they slowly buy into it, you'll see these people where they do the guy with the chi power and he's doing this thing with his hand and there's people flying around the room and doing somersaults and he's not even touching them. And those people, most of them believe it. And they feel like they're flying. It's just like this praying in tongues or the getting the Holy Spirit in you and dancing or whatever. And it's like, they feel it. They feel like he's throwing them across the room with their chi,
That's adrenaline, like some people maybe aren't used to that. Maybe that's why they think it happens. I don't know.
Right. But again, you have to believe it for it to work. It's like, so it's useless because what happens if you come across somebody in a bar who doesn't believe it? There was probably everybody.
Yeah, there was a guy I saw in this one video I was looking at where this news reporter wanted to try these guys' techniques on herself, right? So she made herself kind of the victim, and this guy was trying to do stuff to her, and she couldn't do anything. And he was just like, "Oh, well, that's just because you don't believe it. If you believed it, most of the time it doesn't work." It's just like, man, how useless is that? Like, if you wanted to try to fight somebody on the street and they just had to believe that you're really good at this stuff, like, how does that even work? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference. Like, if I take you down and get on your back and put in a rear naked choke, you don't need to believe it. You're going to go to sleep. Like that.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't need to believe that your carotid arteries are going to be, shut down.
That's like the test, right? That's the test if your super technique is awesome. If you can break out of a rear naked choke,
yes,
that's what it is. But anyway, like I said, there's just these kind of levels, and people get stuck in these worlds without realizing how interconnected an ecosystem it is. Like, specifically with the martial arts, it's an entire industry of people who sell this fake stuff, and it's been going on for decades. I mean, you can look at old comic books and see some of the super awesome techniques that you can learn if you just send in $200 for a tape for something, and it's it never ends. Even in the internet age, there's still people doing this stuff.
And here's the thing is and don't get me wrong, by the way, like I don't ever want to see movie fighting change. I like seeing the kung fu movies, and I like seeing that. I mean, although they are mixing in more, you watch a John Wick movie, you watch one of these movies, he does some flashy karate kung fu stuff, but then he also double eggs you and gets on your back and chokes you out. And they're mixing in some more realistic stuff, but MMA isn't exciting in a movie. It's just not. Jumping and spin kicking and that sort of stuff is what's exciting. And I don't want that to change. I would much rather watch Jet Li than somebody do wrestling.
Right. Yeah, totally. I am getting a frozen screen here.